The most typical thing, right, that happens is there's something called for in the scope, and I don't know, you find a pipe that wasn't there. There's some reason the contractor is telling you that he can't do it the way you asked for it.
Mhm.
And you're coming as the owner and saying, no, I just want what I asked for. And then you have, you know, it's a change order, whatever it is. So sometimes you have to bite the bullet. Every construction project has, you have a certain contingency, 5-10%, so I look at that contingency, the change order, that's there, that's there to keep things moving when you hit those those stumbling block points.
This is the real estate investing experience. We get it. Real estate can be rough sometimes, and that's why we bring in the experts to talk about the experiences you won't hear anywhere else. With your hosts, John Cohen and Chris Grinzik.
What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Real Estate Investing Experience. I'm your host, Chris Grinzik, and with me, as always, is John Cohen. How we doing, bud?
We're hanging in there. We got no complaints.
That's good to hear. Yeah, things are chugging along. We're starting to get into the warmer months of the year. I actually just got my first dose of the vaccine, so we'll see how that goes. And got the microchip inserted now, so tracking my every movement. But yeah, things are all good for the most part.
There you go. Well, if we just we could have some sellers with expectations where we can buy some stuff, we'd be a lot better. But I say that on the same time that I just got an email from somebody asking me if we had any deals that we wanted to sell. And I said, we do, but we're not selling them at any discounts, so yeah. It would be, you're better off waiting for it to hit market, because it would probably be less than what if I sold it before, anything off market. But hey, it is what it is, right? That's the nature of the beast.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know. It felt like even before this, there was like this weird, I don't know, sometimes off-market deals felt like they were actually selling for more than they would have, because people just wanted that like off-market tag, which I always thought was strange. But I don't know. Feels just like a selling point for some people now, and it's not even like people are sourcing the best deals in the world. Not true for everything, obviously, but I don't know. It just felt like an interesting shift the last couple of years.
For sure.
Yeah. But let's jump into today's episode. We got a really great guest on today, and really excited to learn more about him, hear his story, and just have a really great chat. So with that being said, Eli, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, guys. Great to be here.
Yeah, awesome. So kick us off a few minutes. Just tell everybody a little bit about, you, your background, what you do, et cetera.
Sure. I'm an architect. I've been practicing for 8 years now. I'm the principal of a firm, Meltzer, Mandl Architects. The firm is 25 years old. My father started it in 1995 with a partner, David Mandl. We specialize in housing across the tri-state area, mostly New York City metropolitan area, everything new construction, significant rehab, and anything that touches multifamily, energy upgrades, changing certificate of occupancies. We have in the office, we have everything from single family homes, 2-family condos up to 600 unit, 100% affordable housing, senior developments. So anything that touches, building homes for people in New York City and the surrounding area, that's what we get into. We think, we provide a really high level of service and design, and we're focused on the budget for our services and for the construction project and for the real estate deal. Because at the end of the day, these are real estate transactions that have to get done. And we know we play a big part in it, but we're just one part. And we try to hone in on what that part is and how we can facilitate, making this a successful deal and a transaction and construction project for everyone involved, from the owners to the builders to the people that are going to get to live there.
100%. So just want to start it off, frame it up for everybody. When a building is being constructed, there's obviously many, many parties that are involved, more than, when you're buying just an existing project. Where do you guys fit into that scope? Like what role do you play? What, part of the project do you guys kind of take ownership of?
Sure. In a sense, the relationship between a developer and their architect, it's pretty intimate. They'll come to us, especially if it's a client we've been working with for a while. They come to us the second a deal maybe hits their desk, and it's something that's interesting, and they send it our way, and we'll talk about it with them and take a quick look at the zoning, and if on that first read we think it sort of makes sense, and because we see hundreds of these properties a year, just quick zoning analysis, right? And then we'll talk with them, and then we might do a quick zoning analysis. What's the highest and best use there. Sometimes it gets a little more in depth. We'll do some basic floor plans, like back of the napkin sketch, they call it. Quick unit count, floor area takeoff. Again, depends on the deal, depends on the relationship, but we're trying to give them, at that point, we're trying to give information, provide information to help them get in the deal and get the deal done. Now, once the transaction's complete, once they close on it, typically, then we're going to pretty quickly move in to start helping them get their permits. So that's the building code compliance. Again, just checking 4 or 5 times the zoning is correct. That we're maximizing the floor area and the unit counts. And then at this point, we're starting to look at the exterior of the building, the facade design, the materials, the windows. And that's also when we're honing in on the budget, starting to bring in engineers, structural engineers. Is it concrete? Is it steel? Mechanical engineers. Are we going to have, is it going to be heated with steam and natural gas? Are we going to go all electric VRFs? And starting to tie all these pieces together, and pull it together to something that's going to go into the buildings department, going to get their permits, and depending the relationship with the contractor, they're going to pull someone on board to build this thing, and then we help take it through construction. We're keeping an eye to make sure that the contractor's building what's in the drawings and what the owner has contracted him to build.
Mm-hmm. So when you're talking about staying as you're building, staying on top of things, are you guys actually going out there and like checking the actual building is being built to the specifications? Like, are you almost acting as an oversight for that stuff, or do you rely on the builder and the GC to make sure their crews are doing what they're supposed to be doing?
Again, it's project by project, but at the minimum, we act as an agent for the owner, right? Mm-hmm. The owner and the contractor have a contractual relationship, and typically the architect gets tied into that relationship as the owner's agent. And that happens through site visits, which can be anywhere from, say, once a month to several times a month, or even several times a week, depending on the needs and the phase of the project. Sometimes that's even required for financing, that mm-hmm. In order to release funds for construction, the architect has to sign a requisition to release those funds, to that certifying that the work that the contractor is claiming payment for has actually been done. There's various levels, again, of sophistication in terms of how the work gets recorded and reported. There's things called RFIs. If the contractor has questions, he can formally send us a question and we can clarify something from the drawings. There's submittals, for example, windows, right? You get shop drawings, and we will verify that the shop drawings conform with the design drawings. That being said, we're not there to certify the construction. That's the contractor's job. We're just there to act in the best interest of the owner, to that the contractor is adhering to the contract, that he's building what's in the contract documents. That's really our job, because the contract documents have been approved by the buildings department, so they're safe, and it's been obviously approved by ownership, so it satisfies ownership's needs. So our goal is to make sure that what's built is what's on the drawings and what was agreed to by ownership and what was approved by the municipality.
Gotcha. Makes a ton of sense. And I think one thing that's going to be important for a lot of people listening is most are on, the ownership side. Do you recommend people find like a duo of a builder, GC, and an architect that consistently work together? Or is it, hey, I should interview them separately and have them work together and really find people that I like, right? Because I think a lot of people focus on the GC builder side because that's the person putting the thing up. And they're probably going to rely on them to maybe find the architect. Is that a no-go for you? Is it situational? Should they be, interviewed separately and chosen? How do you think the best way to go about that process is?
We have fantastic relationships with a lot of the builders that we've worked with. And they don't go together, but it is helpful to have a team that's sort of worked together before, because while we're out there administering the contract and we're acting as an owner's agent, at the same time, it's in everyone's best interest to sort of keep things moving along at a nice pace, right? Changes do happen in construction, mistakes do happen in construction. Sometimes the mistake is the builder's mistake, sometimes it's our mistake. Or sometimes, and it has to get worked out, and you have to keep things going and be creative to come up with solutions that work for the project and everyone involved. So having a relationship with the builder is very helpful. And also there's different ways that you hire builders. So what people are, I think, a lot of times used to is a bid. You hire them through a bidding process, right? So where the architect puts together a set of drawings and then you put it out to bid, and typically you take the low bid or one of the low bids, and that's a good way. Sometimes depends, for a large project, sometimes that happens, or again, if you're really trying to get the lowest price. But that also, because it's competitive bidding, sometimes it opens up a can of worms, to other issues. So we oftentimes, and we prefer to have what's we'll call a negotiated relationship, where the contractor gets brought in earlier, while we're still in design, and we can do some coordination with him, get some feedback, because different guys, some guys like to build in concrete and some guys like to do, CMU block. And if we can know that early on, and he can give some insight into the budget to the owner, and that we can rely on, we're happy to work with him and to design to that budget and those specifications, because again, that's going to be the best way to success. So we definitely recommend, working with a team that's been together and getting everyone on board earlier, and trying to get things wrapped up earlier in that sense, to get everyone on the same page. So when they're building, you just sort of, you want to let them go and knock it out and do their thing, and just be there to answer questions. And you don't want to have to change things or to sort of be stepping on their toes. That's not the ideal relationship.
100%. So you bring up a good point, right? I think obviously everyone's very used to, especially for just like home renovations, right? You want to get a fence put in, or you want to get something else done. You bring out 3 people, get 3 bids, and you choose the one that's either the lowest or you like, or a combination of the two. How does somebody then have confidence to go the route that you're talking about of, hey, it's not really like, here's the scope of work, go get 3, 5, 10 bids and choose the one you like the best? How do you have confidence that you're not only getting the best or at a fair price from somebody, if you bring them in so early into the process, you're not really having that bidding process?
Right. I mean, so again, are we talking about someone who's built a number of buildings and has relationships? Again, that's one story. Someone who's new and doing a first project, yeah, it makes sense to talk to multiple people. But I would, again, don't wait. You don't have to wait till those drawings are done and you do a formal bidding process. You can get feedback earlier, and some people will be more helpful and less helpful. And the architect, even if it's not someone that I've worked with before, one of the things I do is I'm advising my client, I'm advising ownership on hiring contractors whenever that happens, whether it's earlier in the phase or whether it's at a bidding phase. I will give our feedback, and we can get a read about who they are and the work they've done. And obviously referrals are a massive piece of this. You have to make sure you speak to people that have worked with them and you see the work that they've done, and let them take you to their job site. I can walk on a job site and I can tell right away so much. Is it a mess? Are guys running around like they don't know? Are they standing around watching each other work? What's going on in the job? So you can pick a lot of that up within the first 5 minutes. You're there, and you can learn a lot about what sort of organization you're dealing with.
So that's a really interesting topic. So if you have anybody that is looking to do stuff, you would advise them to go to existing job site, walk around with them, take a look. And I mean, obviously, if you're talking about a small little project, it's a little bit tougher, but for these larger developments or, building brand new stuff, you would strongly advise people to do that.
Yeah, but small ones too, man. I mean, listen, a home renovation, sometimes people are even living in the home while it's going on, and that's part of the experience. How respectful are they of that? Are they? Is there so much dust you can't live? Are they able to control that? Or if it's just a window replacement, I mean, it's in fact smaller projects oftentimes require more logistics because you're dealing with existing conditions. It's in a way it's easier to knock it down and start from scratch, and you have everything under control. But when you're working on existing buildings, and especially if there's tenants in place, that really requires it's a more delicate sense of logistics and planning and coordination. So for sure, anytime you're talking about hiring someone, if you can get on a job site that they're in the middle of doing, I think that's a fantastic piece of advice.
Mm-hmm. I know you mentioned just a couple. Are there any other things that you think are either really good signs or really big red flags that you've seen on job sites?
The big thing always is finishing. Do jobs get finished 100%, or are they out the door at 95%? Which is, in a sense, it's typical. And in fact, frankly, some of that goes back on ownership. You have to realize that from the beginning of a job, everyone's trying to get their money up front, right? And they're trying to leave as little to the end. So, and in the beginning, you might not realize that's happening, but you have to be, on top of them, review the payment requisitions, make sure they're actually billing for work that they've done, and that's a good way to see. But again, see jobs that they've just finished. Are all the door handles on? Is all the edge beads put on the drywall? If work gets done, that's a really great sign. People that actually finish their work. But the big thing, referrals. Speak to as many people as you can who have worked with them. Like any other business, if someone's getting in fights with people or lawsuits, that's a big red flag. But on the other hand, construction, it happens. But you just want to get as much information as you can.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
I was going to say, from a standpoint, I think it's a big thing, especially anytime you're going to contractor and billing and making sure they're billing for what was done. What are you, in your role, or what advice can you give to anybody to make sure, how can they make sure what they're being billed for is done? Or can you guys help facilitate that to make sure that they're billed, they're at the right stage? Because I think that's a huge part of this, is just, you don't want to you don't want to give him too much money where he's not done, because then, inevitably it takes a little bit longer or they stop working. So how can you go about that, and how can you fact check that what you're doing is actually done and billed?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, the requisition should have as much detail as you can get out of them. The other part is, if you're keeping, submittals, RFIs, shop drawings, then you have a record of what's getting billed. And then some of it, again, if you don't pay them, they're not going to work. So I'm not recommending, you don't want to have a adversarial relationship, but this is, every time you're going to go and pay them, you have to realize that it's almost not that you can negotiate, but that's a point, it's a milestone in the project. Make sure that's the time when you ask for things that, if you've been asking them, for a month or two to get something done, and it still hasn't gotten done, make sure it gets done before you pay them. Basically, everything that you think should have been done at this point, and you've been asking to get done and hasn't get done, make sure it gets done, and then pay them, not in an adversarial way, but even if it sets it back a day or two, but make sure all the things that you expect as the owner should be done at this point are getting done.
So I guess that brings up a good point, right? If you get into that situation where you think, they're charging you for stuff that hasn't been done yet, or you feel like the work hasn't been done well enough, but you're midway through a project, how do you approach that situation? Is it just, don't pay until they get the work done? Is it, do you try to split the difference? Like, in your experience, what's been the best way to kind of massage that where you're saying you're not being combative or adversarial, but you're getting what you're paying for.
This is the most typical thing, right, that happens is there's something called for in the scope, and I don't know, you find a pipe that wasn't there. There's some reason the contractor is telling you that he can't do it the way you asked for it.
Mhm.
And you're coming as the owner and saying, no, I just want what I asked for. And then you have, it's a change order, whatever it is. So sometimes you have to bite the bullet. Every construction project you have a certain contingency, 5-10%, so I look at that contingency, the change order, that's there, that's there to keep things moving when you hit those stumbling block points. You don't want to get stuck in construction and stop construction. So you got to keep things going. And sometimes you have to be creative and take a day or two, take a week, come back, look at another solution, speak to your architect. Maybe there's another way to do it that's simpler. Maybe there's actually a way to do it that's less expensive. Maybe there's something staring everyone in the face that everyone's just looked past. And now is the time to consider that. And yes, you may pay a change order for it now, but you can keep things going. You don't want to be like, again, you have to have in your construction budget 5-10% of these contingencies, and you should expect to spend it. And one of the reasons you're spending it is because you have to keep the job moving. Because the biggest cost you'll have is to have a stalled job, a job that doesn't get to the finish line, and then you can't use it and you can't start producing income. So the key is always keeping your eye on the finish line, keeping it move forward. And when the relationship breaks down, that's the biggest stumbling block that keeps the project from finishing, which is a big problem for everybody.
Mm-hmm. No, 100%. I mean, even just renovation jobs, like all the value add stuff we do, we always have at least a 10% contingency in there for random things that come up or things you don't expect. I mean, especially, with these older properties, you start getting in there and doing stuff, sometimes you don't really know what you're up against until you open up a wall and you start looking at different things or you pull stuff down. I mean, the first deal I bought down here was literally just multiple different changes that I wasn't expecting. And part of it is because I've never been so in the weeds on the construction renovation side. And part of it was too, we kind of just threw a number in there and said, we'll figure it out after the fact, which may or may not be right. But, those are the things you kind of run into. And that's why it was interesting to hear you say sometimes it is just a lot easier to knock it down and build because you don't have to worry about what other people have done, right? Like, my dad's my partner on that deal. And we just kept talking, like, even just like little things, the way they put in like ACs or little, 90s they put in for plumbing just wasn't 100% accurate. And you're like, God, it would be almost easier just to like build a whole brand new complex than to try to like come in and do these renovations. Cause either it's, was just done very differently 50, 60 years ago, or just, the person that built it just didn't do it in a way that you think would be the best. So it was just funny to hear you say that because I've literally just been going through it for the past 5-6 months.
Listen, I'm dealing on a project right now in New Jersey, in Newark, and we were hoping to get it through as a renovation project. But I walked in the first day, and the contractor had ripped the plaster off all the walls, which is not what we had called for. We had called for removing some portions of walls, and we did it for a reason. Because we were hoping that it would qualify as a less intensive construction project. He ripped everything off, and now it's a reconstruction project, and we have to add sprinklers. And he did it because it's easier for him to work that way. The contractor would love to work with a blank slate. So especially when you're doing rehab, even if it's a home renovation, same thing. You have to understand that you're not going to get what you want because you're dealing with existing material that you can only massage it so much. So again, you have to really be focused on the goal. What's my goal? To get in there with X amount of units, in this time frame, and and this is my budget. And you're going to have to accept that the building is only, you can only put so much lipstick on a pig. It's like, this is what it is. It's a 100-year-old building. They built it for certain reasons. It was a different lifestyle. So you have to have your expectations. The goal here is not the building. The goal is the financial transaction or whatever it is that you're doing this deal for. And how do we get to that finish line and get this thing finished? And that's very hard with existing projects. Sometimes they are harder than than new building projects. The flip side, in terms of the architect services, is the drawing set for existing buildings, unless you're willing to do a lot of like probing, open up and get a lot of information, and then you can plan. If you can't do that for any reason, because there's tenants there, or you don't actually have site control yet, then you should probably sort of try to adjust as much as possible the architect services from the design side to the construction administration side. So go light on drawings, less drawings. What do you need to get through to get your permit? And then have more scope for the architect during construction. And you're gonna have to pay for it, right? Because it means having him come down to the job site and having him produce sketches of existing conditions, but have that budgeted in to your contract, and just understand where you can get the most value out of his services. Because he could go and do all these drawings, and then you open up and it's like worthless. Yeah. Right. But you do need his insight about, especially when it's opened up and you want to make decisions on the fly in construction and things are moving fast. You do want to have their insight.
Yeah. So it sounded like you mentioned something in Newark that when they ripped the walls off, basically you had to bring everything up to code. Is that right?
New Jersey has the existing building subcode, and they have these different classifications. I think there's repairs, and then there's renovations and alterations and reconstructions. I think that's what it is. And depending where you fall into it, they'll require either new sprinklers, or they'll make you put in ADA accessibility. Now the flip side is a lot of it is sort of building department by building department, and the guy they might just want that every new significant construction project gets a sprinkler system, and you could argue with them, but a lot of it is relationships. And if you know them, who do you know in the city, in the planning department, in the building department, and you can discuss this with them earlier, and you can try to get a read on what they're looking for. And if you need to put in a sprinkler system, that's fine, but just make sure it's in your budget and you're planning for it. You don't want to go in and try to sneak something under their nose, and then you get caught, and now you're in a ditch.
Yeah, well, it's just interesting because when I was looking at a deal down here in Jacksonville, there was apparently some zoning code that if you spend more than 50% of your purchase on renovation, then you have to bring everything up to current code.
Yeah.
And it was like, I was looking at a deal that was like, basically needed all new electrical, plumbing, AC, roofs. And it was like, was thinking it might have been worth it, might have not. But then once I heard about this, I was like, all right, now if you've got to throw in, like you said, ADA stuff, sprinkler systems, there wasn't technically enough parking for the current zoning code. It's like, now you start throwing things all out of whack and adding a totally different layer of complexity to it. So I think it's just interesting to hear how that comes into effect as you're looking at different things.
That's a very typical clause, this 50% clause. Sometimes the number's a little different, but yes, if you're doing, a certain percent of the value of the project, they're going to make you upgrade it. But, I hear you say it needed new electrical or new plumbing. Sometimes you assume that, but maybe it doesn't. I mean, you might not want to live there, or it might not be your ideal building once it's done, but maybe just to get in there and start leasing it, maybe you don't need all new electrical. Maybe you don't have to open up every wall, and what's the value add? I understand there's different layers. You have X amount of capital you want to deploy, and you want to get certain rents. But again, sometimes it's just about taking a step back. What's the minimum amount of work I have to do here? If the pipes are all leaking and falling apart, fine, I need to play. But if the toilets are working, the sinks are working, there's no damage being done to the building, maybe, I understand you want to extend the life of the building, but maybe for this transaction, that's not the play here. If your goal is to get this deal done, or maybe it's just not the deal for you. But
yeah,
you have to look at these things, in a few different ways, and we're always trying to simplify, especially when it comes to existing buildings.
Yeah, no, that's always the battle, right? Of not coming in and doing too much, and it's way easier when you can do less, right? John likes to say the more things that have to go right for a deal to work, a lot riskier it gets. So the simpler you can keep it, for sure. That one we just happened to have an inspection report, and there was just no ground wire for any of the electrical, which my dad's an electrical engineer and was just like, that's not going to fly. So we were like, okay, gotta rerun it. And it was just old, but no, 100%. Cause like I have the two deals, and one is we're spending 15 to 20 grand a unit redoing a lot of this stuff. And the other one we're spending like 5 to 7. And I spend like 80% of my time on the first one because it needs so much more work done. And it's like, the first one should in theory produce more, but I look at it, I'm like, geez, I'd love to have just 2 of the second one and, just have a little bit of an easier time. So it's always an interesting dynamic of like, the battle of like, okay, where do you stop? Like, where's the line that you stop doing stuff? Because when you buy something that's 30, 40, 50, 100 years old, you could, do everything, right? You could bring everything brand new, do everything and make it look really nice. But at some point, the ROI on the dollars you're spending just doesn't make sense. And you're doing more work that's needed. Cause like you said, it's there, it's built, it's not necessarily broken, even though you're extending the life, and sometimes it's a little tough to draw that line.
There it is, ROI. That's the big one. We're always talking about ROI in our business too. It's like, if you had all the money in the world, you could do a lot of things, but you're running a business here.
Mm-hmm. No, for sure. John, you're mute.
Sorry, I was about to say there's something to say about value engineering a project if it can be done, right? Saving drywall, saving stuff, but if it can't, right? You can't fit a square peg in a round hole. But when everyone goes in and looks at a project with the same lens, if you can get it done, value engineering works all the time as long as it's not structurally unsound or unsafe to live.
Yeah, and or sometimes another trade-off is time. Like you pointed out, we saw already. Sometimes it's just easier, faster to just gut the damn thing.
Yep.
And if you do it piecemeal, it's slower. Again, these are all these trade-offs you have to just take. To look at it deal by deal.
Mm. What are some things, just coming backwards a little bit, when people are looking to work with an architect, that questions they should be asking, things they should consider, or like things you just wish more people knew, since you're on the other side of the coin?
Yeah, I mean, a big one is, do they have experience in the municipality?
Mm-hmm.
So New York City, do they have experience with the zoning? Do they have experience with the building code? Do they have experience with contractors in New York City? They're a special breed. And also just, again, understanding, architects, we're not, at least in our business, we're not here to spend your money. We're here to, you're entrusting us with your money to make this deal happen, but we're not here to sort of spend frivolously. We're here because you trust us to spend the money in the way that you want it to be spent and to get the deal done for you. So we're your agent. We're someone that you're trusting to help you get this deal done. We're not in an adversarial relationship, but we're looking to build this, beautiful glass box and just spend your money. That's not what we're here to do, and that's not what we enjoy doing. We think we do really fantastic work, and we think our buildings are really stunning, but they all come in on budget, and they're realistic in terms of the client's expectations and the realities of the real estate environment that we're operating in, and we're responsible with the money that is being spent on the project. And in fact, we often find that we think we save our clients money, and we add value to the project, because this is an investment and the goal is to add value. And I think that our biggest piece of the puzzle is how we can add value to a job, to a real estate deal. Mm-hmm. So, and I don't know if every architect feels that way, but that's definitely the way we feel. My father was a real estate developer in the 80s before he started this business. So we always look at it through that lens, what's the goal here? And we try to listen to the client and what there really is important to them, and just try to provide them the value where they see it. And it's mm-hmm. not about where we see the value, it's about where our clients see the value.
Mm-hmm. And when you're talking earlier about the relationships with the city and the zoning and the code, regulators and stuff like that, how important really is it to have those relationships? Like, because how much can they bend? How much can you kind of lean on that relationship as things come up? And then how does someone go about establishing those relationships for, the point in the future where they may actually need them?
Yeah, again, it depends. Like New York City is unique because we have a massive zoning resolution, and the building code is everything's very prescriptive and it's very bureaucratic. But the flip side is that it's very predictable. So if you follow the rules, it will get approved, and check off all the boxes and the red tape, and you can get it approved. You don't need to rely on relationships in a weird way that often, although it's helpful to know the building, the commissioner of the buildings department sometimes.
Mhm.
But most projects just get taken care of sort of as of right. Outside of New York City, almost every project has to go through a planning board or a zoning board, because usually going to go for a variance, whether it's a parking variance, which is the most common variance. I would say almost every single project we've done out of New York City always has gone for a parking variance, because in a way they make the parking requirements very, very severe, because they want you, in a sense, to come and negotiate with them. That's how they get you to the table.
Mhm.
So you're always going to have a planning board meeting, a zoning board meeting. So if they recognize you or your team members, your planner, your architect, your lawyer, when you come to that meeting, that's going to be helpful. I mean, I sit in these meetings, and sometimes some of the, they do 3 or 4 projects at a time, and they're talking to each other on first name basis. The lawyer's talking with the board members, like they had coffee yesterday, and that's obviously helpful. And you can even get a read on things before you go into your planning board or your zoning meeting.
Mhm.
When it comes to the building code, that's less flexible. But again, there's, every city, it's more bureaucratic. So every municipality has different procedures if you need a variance from the building code. And it's always helpful to, again, know the officials, know who to talk to, so you can figure out, what needs to be done to satisfy what they're looking for, and you can get that done. So, and the way you build that relationship is just through doing projects, and through doing them, again, not adversarially. They're not there to make your life difficult. They have their own agenda. They're looking out for the best interests of the municipality. And if you sort of recognize, what their goals are and how you can work together to meet their goals and meet your goals, then that's how you start the relationship. And then once you do a few projects, you get to know them, and they get to trust you, and the town trusts you and see that you're doing things that's good for the municipality. And over a course of time, again, you build a reputation and you build relationships, and that's very valuable.
Mhm.
Especially out, in smaller markets, outside of New York City. That's a massive thing.
Mhm. Do you find, like, in those smaller markets, and I know, outside New York City versus other areas different, do you find the less stringent code is a benefit, or is, more of a disadvantage? Like, do you have greater flexibility in that regard?
Again, building code is different from zoning.
Okay.
Building code is in general, it's more strict because it's dealing with life safety, and there's really only, at this point in America, I think there's one building code that almost everywhere follows, or they
Mhm.
follow a slight variation of it. There might be some changes. It's called the International Building Code. So that's sort of across the board, and there's not a lot of wiggle room for that. 2 means of egress. These are basic things that you have to
Mhm.
deal with. Where you get a much wider variances in range of oversight is when it comes to the zoning. Um, New York City, it's very prescriptive. Other places like, in New Jersey, plenty of towns, it's very, very open-ended. And it's difficult. It makes it in a way more difficult to do real estate development, because you don't know what you can actually build until you've cut a deal with them.
Mhm.
So again, that's why it is helpful to have those relationships, because you need to have a sense of what you can even build, right? Or you at least need to have a track record of working with people who sort of know how far you can push the limit, right? If if it says 100 parking spaces required, how much do we think we can get away with? Can we get away with 50? Can we get away with 25? Or is it going to be 75? And that's just from experience or trends. Sometimes it's like there's years where they're just like really, for whatever reason, they just decide they need to get that parking, and they're driving a hard bargain. But you need to have that information earlier on, because you have to do your pro forma, and you have to figure out if you even want to get into the deal.
Mm-hmm.
And also these are not elected officials typically, right? They're appointed officials, so they outlast administration. So these relationships even outlast relationships with elected officials, which can be helpful, but that changes. But these people are there for the long haul. This is their career, sitting on the zoning board, sitting on the planning board, running the building code department. So, it has to be built up over years and of experience and relationship with these people.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. I love it. I think it's a really great place to wrap up. I definitely learned a ton. So Eli, thank you for coming on and, sharing your insights and knowledge and stuff like that. If people want to learn more about you, connect with you, follow you, where can they do all that stuff?
Yeah. Check me out on LinkedIn. I post pretty regularly over there. We're also on Instagram, and please visit our website. You can reach out to us. The email's on the website, info@meltzermandlpc.com. Always happy if you have questions, chat, look at properties, deals. We're always happy to talk. This is a full contact business, right? So stay in touch.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, anything multifamily, especially in New York and the surrounding areas. But I think, across the country, we can give you a high level view in terms of, we understand apartment layouts and living, and we knock these things out quickly, and our fees are very competitive. So yeah, always happy to chat. Thanks, guys.
Awesome. Guys, definitely go check them out. And thank you everybody so much for listening to this episode of the podcast. If you're not already subscribed, it would mean the world to John and I if you would do so. And if you are, please send it to someone that would get a tremendous amount of value from this episode. Eli, once again, thanks so much for coming on, man. This is great.
Thanks, guys. Enjoy the warm weather.